Welcome to Nor Street. Like, subscribe, and stay with the mystery. Tell me, which part of the world are you watching from?
Chapter 1. The Visitor with Another Man's Name. No one rings Nero Wolfe's front bell after dinner unless he is either desperate, foolish, or carrying enough money to persuade Wolfe that his orchids may safely be left for an hour. Fritz Brenner had just served coffee in the office, and Wolfe was studying a catalogue of orchid hybrids with an expression that suggested civilization had produced only one respectable occupation. I had settled behind my desk with the evening newspapers, hoping New York's criminals would display enough courtesy to postpone their ambitions until morning. The bell rang. Wolfe closed the catalogue without looking up. "Archie, I was afraid you might ask." I crossed the hall, opened the front door, and found a gentleman who appeared to have been assembled by a committee determined to avoid even the smallest mistake. He wore a dark grey suit that had never met a careless tailor, polished black shoes reflecting the porch light, and gloves he removed with deliberate care before offering his hand. "My name is Edwin Harper." His voice carried confidence without arrogance. He looked to be around 55, clean-shaven, with silver beginning to replace black hair at the temples. His eyes were calm enough to reassure a banker. "I should like to see Nero Wolfe. I should like to see the Yankees win every game they play," I said. "One of us is more likely to be disappointed. What brings you here?" "It concerns blackmail. That word has a dependable effect. It rarely announces itself honestly. Half the people who claim to be victims deserve sympathy. The other half deserve accountants, priests, or prison cells, I'll ask. Inside." Wolfe received the visitor with the resignation of a man interrupted by unnecessary weather. The stranger accepted the red leather chair opposite Wolfe's desk and rested a polished leather briefcase beside him. "You are Mr. Wolfe?" "I am. My name is Edwin Harper." Wolfe inclined his head. "I own Harper Industrial Equipment." That attracted my attention. Harper Industrial Equipment supplied machinery to half the manufacturing firms in the Northeast. The company was old, respectable, and notably free from newspaper scandals. Harper continued. "For nearly 3 months I have received anonymous letters." He removed several envelopes from his briefcase. "They contain accurate information concerning my private affairs." "Financial?" Wolfe asked. "No, personal. Entirely." He handed me the letters. Every envelope had been typed. Every sheet contained only a few lines. One read, "I know why you visited Greystone House in October." Another, "Your family would be disappointed if they learned the truth." The newest message contained only one sentence, "You will soon lose your own name." I read it twice. "Interesting." Choice of words. Harper nodded. "The writer demands one. $100,000. Has he identified himself?" "No." "Have you paid anything?" "No." Wolfe folded his hands. "You omitted an important fact." Harper looked surprised. "What fact?" "You have not denied whatever accusation the blackmailer intends to reveal." A faint smile appeared. "No, I have not." "Why?" "Because denial would accomplish nothing." I liked the answer because it avoided melodrama. Wolfe asked another question. "What occurred at Greystone House?" Harper hesitated. "I cannot discuss that." "Then I cannot assist you. I can tell you only this." He leaned slightly forward. "My reputation is the foundation of everything I possess. If these accusations become public, whether true or false, my company will suffer. My family will suffer. I require discretion above all else." Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. "Mr. Harper, you ask me to pursue an invisible adversary while refusing to identify the battlefield. I understand you do not." Silence occupied the room. Finally, Harper reached inside his coat and produced a certified check. It contained enough zeros to improve Fritz's opinion of humanity for several months. "A retainer." Wolfe glanced toward me. "Archie," I examined. "Genuine," Harper stood. "I ask only that you discover the identity of the blackmailer before Friday." "Why Friday?" "The letters promise everything will end then." "In what fashion?" "I was not told." He picked up his gloves. "If you accept, telephone my office tomorrow morning." He handed me a business card. "Edwin Harper, Harper Industrial Equipment. The engraving was expensive without advertising the fact. He left quietly. After the front door closed, I returned to the office. Well, Wolfe grunted. He concealed something. Naturally. He concealed nearly everything. I spread the letters across my desk. The typewriter is ordinary. The wording is not. No, I tapped the final sentence. You will soon lose your own name. Odd. Wolfe. Open the orchid catalogue again. Archie. Yes? Visit Harper Industrial Equipment tomorrow morning. To learn what? Everything Mr. Harper neglected to mention. I smiled. That narrows it down. The following morning, New York looked washed clean by overnight rain. Though experience had taught me that appearances rarely survived breakfast, Harper Industrial Equipment occupied 3 polished floors overlooking Madison Avenue. The reception area reflected quiet prosperity instead of theatrical wealth. A secretary greeted me pleasantly. I should like to see Mr. Harper. Do you have an appointment? No. Your name? I handed over my card. She disappeared through an oak. Or less than a minute later, another gentleman emerged. He resembled the visitor. From the previous evening, only in one respect, age, everything else differed. This Harper was broader across the shoulders, wore a trimmed moustache, and carried himself with the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to giving orders all day. I'm Edwin Harper. I know. No, he said carefully. I don't believe you do. We entered his office. He remained standing. What business do you have with me? You retained Nero Wolfe last night. His eyebrows rose. I most certainly did not. I waited. He waited longer, finally. He spoke again. I have never visited Nero. Wolfe, I studied him. People lie in different ways. Some blink, some become two. Still, some grow talkative. Harper merely looked puzzled. Have your business card. I distribute thousands. You signed a certified check. I signed no check for Nero Wolfe. He pressed a button. His secretary entered. Bring my check register. She returned almost immediately. Harper opened the book himself. Every certified payment for the previous month appeared neatly recorded. None matched the amount sitting in Wolfe's safe. He closed the register. Regret your wasted journey. It wasn't entirely wasted, no. I've learned one thing. What? Somebody introduced himself as Edwin Harper. Harper frowned. Impossible. I shook his hand. He walked to the window. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Mr. Goodwin, 3 weeks ago someone requested certified copies of my corporate signatures. Who? I don't know. Were they issued? No. Anything else unusual? He hesitated. There have been several inquiries concerning old company records. What kind? Employment files dating back nearly 20 years. Why? I couldn't discover. Before I could ask another question, the telephone rang. Harper answered. His expression hardened. What? Who? When? He replaced the receiver slowly. My accountant. What happened? Our company warehouse received a delivery this morning. So? It was addressed to me, and? There was nothing inside the crate. Nothing. Only one sheet of paper. What did it say? Harper swallowed. It says. He opened a drawer and handed me the folded page. Typed across the center were 8 words. A borrowed name opens every locked door. I folded the paper carefully. This was no ordinary blackmail. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to impersonate a respected businessman before ever committing the principal crime. The time I reached the brownstone, Wolfe had already finished lunch and was preparing for the sacred 2 hours reserved for his orchids. I placed Harper's paper beside the anonymous letters. Without speaking, Wolfe read every line twice. Then he looked at me. The man who visited this house yesterday. Yes? He was not Edwin Harper. No. He wished us to believe he was. Exactly. Wolfe nodded once. Then Archie, our client has committed his first deception before asking for our assistance. I leaned back. Which means? It means, Wolfe said quietly, that the blackmailer may not be pursuing Edwin Harper at all. He closed his eyes. Someone has borrowed another man's name. And if that was merely the beginning, I asked, what exactly is he planning to steal next? Wolfe opened the anonymous note one final time. His eyes rested on the sentence, You will soon lose your own name. I suspect, he murmured, that we have not yet understood what that sentence truly means. Outside, The afternoon traffic rolled along West 35th Street as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. Inside the brownstone, a stranger had entered under another man's identity, left behind a genuine retainer, authentic business papers, and a trail that began not with a murder, but with a stolen name. It was the sort of beginning Nero Wolfe disliked, which generally meant the ending would be expensive, dangerous, and unforgettable. Chapter 2. The Trail of Perfect Signatures. Nero. Wolfe has often remarked that the most dangerous liar is not the one who invents facts, but the one who borrows them. A completely imaginary identity attracts attention sooner or later. A borrowed one enjoys the protection of another man's reputation. People see a familiar name and stop asking questions. The morning after my visit to the real Edwin Harper, Wolfe devoted exactly 2 hours to his orchids, exactly 1 hour to lunch, and exactly 6 minutes to explaining my afternoon. "You will determine," he said, "how extensively our counterfeit Mr. Harper has traveled under that name. By asking politely, by observing intelligently, that usually costs more. It usually succeeds." He reached for another helping of stewed pears, signaling the discussion was over. When Wolfe began eating, even Inspector Kramer would have recognized the wisdom of silence. I left the brownstone carrying 3 things: the forged business card, copies of the anonymous letters, and a growing conviction that somebody had planned this deception months in advance. The first stop was the Lexington Hotel. The polished clerk behind the registration desk looked exactly like a man who had learned to distrust strangers while pretending otherwise. "My name is Archie Goodwin." He glanced at my card. "What may I do for you?" "I'm looking for a guest. We generally prefer our guests remain where they are." This one checked out. "Name? Edwin Harper." The clerk consulted a thick register. His finger stopped halfway down a page. "Yes. When?" "4 nights ago." "Stayed how long?" 3 nights. "Business address?" He turned the book toward me. "Harper Industrial Equipment." The genuine company address appeared beneath it. Room number, arrival date, departure date. Everything looked ordinary. Then I examined the signature. Perfect, not merely similar. Perfect. The sweeping H, the narrow cross on the T, even the flourish beneath the surname matched the genuine signatures Harper had shown me. "May I?" The clerk handed me the register. I compared the signature with one Harper had written before my eyes yesterday. Identical, too identical. People rarely write their names exactly the same way twice. Tiny differences creep into every honest signature. This one looked copied rather than written. "Did anyone verify his identity?" The clerk frowned. He presented business cards. "No driver's license?" "No." "Anyone recognize him?" He entertained visitors. "Several?" "Quite a few." Interesting. A borrowed reputation had opened more than one door. My next destination lay 3 blocks away. The Imperial Club maintained stricter standards than most banks and considerably better carpets. The receptionist listened patiently. "Mr. Harper signed our luncheon register last Tuesday." She produced another leather-bound book. Again, I found it. Edwin Harper. Again, the signature was flawless. Again, the address belonged to the genuine businessman. "Who invited him?" She consulted another page. "Mr. Samuel Dixon." "Did Mr. Dixon know him personally?" "I cannot say." "I can." She looked puzzled. "No, because if Dixon had truly known Edwin Harper, he would have recognized the impostor immediately." Unless he had never actually met Harper before, that possibility pleased me even less. Outside, I found a public telephone and called Wolfe. "The trail is growing." It generally does. "Hotel." "Yes." "Private club." "Proceed." Every signature is perfect. Silence. Then Wolfe asked quietly, "Perfect?" "Exactly alike." "I expected that." "You did?" "A practiced forgery often seeks precision. Ordinary handwriting doesn't." "Exactly," I smiled. "So our gentleman practiced for months, maybe years. Continue." The line went dead. That was Wolfe's version of encouragement. By late afternoon, I had visited 2 restaurants, 1 shipping office, and an accounting firm. The results formed a pattern so neat it almost offended me. Everywhere our counterfeit Harper had gone, people remembered him favorably. He was pleasant, very courteous, paid promptly, excellent manners. No one remembered anything unusual except one elderly cashier at a restaurant near Bryant Park. He tipped too carefully. I blinked. Too carefully? Always exactly 20%. So? No wealthy businessman calculates tips with a pencil. She demonstrated by pretending to write invisible figures on her palm. He did. I thanked her. That single observation accomplished more than 20 impressive signatures. Real confidence never measures itself so precisely. Artificial confidence often does. The final address on my list occupied a narrow office building on East 42nd Street. The brass directory listed dozens of companies. One of them read, Harper Industrial Purchasing Office, 4th floor, room 416. The elevator groaned upward reluctantly. Room 416 contained one desk, one chair, one filing cabinet, and enough dust to suggest nobody had performed meaningful work there in months. A middle-aged woman knitting beside the window looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Mr. Harper, you and several others. He isn't here?" "He never is." "What business operates from this office?" She laughed. "I've wondered that myself. You work here. I collect mail." "For whom?" "I've never met the owner." "When does he come?" "Twice each week." "Describe him." She shrugged. "Average height." "Hair?" "Brown?" "Age?" 40, maybe." "Name?" He signs the receipt. "What name?" She opened a drawer and handed me the latest delivery log. There it was again. Edwin Harper. Perfect, absolutely perfect. I examined the room more closely. No family photographs, no business correspondence, no invoices, no telephone directory. The filing cabinet contained nothing except blank stationery. This office conducts no business. "That's true," the woman agreed. "What does it do?" I've never asked. Outside, I stood looking at the building while traffic rolled steadily along 42nd Street, a rented office, borrowed identity, perfect signatures, satisfied witnesses. It suddenly occurred to me that nobody had actually described the man. They all remembered the name. Very few remembered the face. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe had finished dinner and appeared comfortably settled behind his desk with coffee. Fritz withdrew after serving us. I placed my notebook beside Wolfe's elbow. "Hotel," he nodded. "Restaurant," another nod. "Private club." He waited. "False office." That interested him. I described everything in order, including the empty room and the elderly woman collecting mail. Finally, I laid 3 signature samples across the desk. Wolfe studied them without touching. "Yes, they're identical. So identical they cease to resemble genuine handwriting." I leaned back. "He fooled everyone." "No." Wolfe looked mildly irritated. "He satisfied everyone." "Difference?" "A considerable one." He pointed toward the signatures. "Observe. I have." "Not sufficiently." He pushed the papers toward me. "Each signature begins confidently. Yes." "Each ends confidently. Also yes. No hesitation." "Correct." "What is missing?" I stared. "I don't know." "The unconscious variation produced by habit." I looked again. He was right. Every letter possessed the same spacing. Every curve matched precisely. Each signature resembled an engraving more than handwriting. They were memorized. Exactly. Wolfe folded his hands. Our visitor wished every hotel clerk, every restaurant cashier, every club steward, and every business acquaintance to believe without question that Edwin Harper had personally visited them. I frowned. That's a great deal of effort. For a purpose. To avoid being identified? No. Wolfe's voice became softer. To be identified. I blinked. He continued. An anonymous traveler hides himself. Our man didn't. He announced himself repeatedly, using Harper's name. Precisely. I considered the empty office. The office wasn't a hiding place. No, it was another stage. Correct. And every signature invited people to remember Edwin Harper. Wolfe closed the notebook, which means the counterfeit identity was never intended to conceal the man's movements. He reached for his coffee. It existed for the opposite reason, so people would remember where he had been. Yes. I looked out toward the darkened street beyond the office window. Someone had walked openly through New York under another man's respected name. He had signed hotel registers, accepted luncheon invitations, rented offices, attended business meetings, and left behind flawless handwriting that any expert would recognize as counterfeit only after careful examination. He had not been hiding. He had been planting memories. Every witness would swear Edwin Harper had been present. Every record would support them. And somewhere beyond those perfect signatures, the real purpose of the deception was still waiting for us, untouched, unseen, and growing steadily more dangerous. Chapter 3. The office behind the locked door Nero Wolfe has always maintained that locks are among the most optimistic inventions of civilized man. A locked door encourages its owner to believe that whatever lies behind it remains secure. Wolfe has solved enough cases to know that a lock protects only against the honest. The morning after my tour through hotels, clubs, and imaginary business offices began as every respectable morning in the brownstone ought to begin. Wolfe disappeared. Upstairs at 9 for his 2 sacred hours among the orchids. Theodore Horst guarded the plant rooms with the solemn devotion of a high priest, and Fritz occupied the kitchen with similar determination. I remained downstairs answering correspondence and wondering why anyone would spend months teaching strangers to remember a man who had never been there. At 11:30 the telephone rang. "Goodwin," a careful voice answered. "My name is Martin Ellis." The name stirred a faint memory. "I'm an attorney." That explained it. Attorneys often spoke as though every sentence might someday be introduced as evidence. "I understand Mr. Wolfe has become involved in a matter concerning Edwin Harper. He has become interested in someone claiming to be Edwin Harper." There was a pause. "I believe that gentleman visited my office." "When?" "Last Thursday." "Would you mind if I came to see you?" "I should prefer it." "I'll be there in half an hour." Martin Ellis occupied 3 quiet rooms overlooking Lower Broadway. The building itself had probably been respectable before automobiles were invented and had never seen any reason to change. Ellis greeted me personally. He was a thin man in his early 60s, with silver hair, rimless spectacles, and the habit of folding his hands before answering even the simplest question. "You are Archie Goodwin." "So I've been told." He smiled politely. "My secretary remembers your photographs in the newspapers. She has unfortunate taste." He ignored that and led me into his private office. It was exactly what I expected from a lawyer who had spent 30 years preserving other people's problems. Shelves climbed to the ceiling. Filing cabinets occupied one wall. Every folder carried neat handwritten labels. I received a visitor identifying himself as Edwin Harper. How did he introduce himself? With a business card. "Only that?" Ellis nodded. "I knew the Harper name." "You had never met him?" "No. Yet you admitted him immediately." "I did." I wandered slowly around the office. What did he want? He said he wished to review an old property agreement. Did he explain why? He claimed Harper. Industrial equipment intended to purchase several adjoining warehouses. Reasonable enough, so I believed. Ellis removed a thick ledger from a cabinet. I located the file. He opened it on his desk. The visitor examined these papers for perhaps 20 minutes. He copied anything. Not in my presence. Took photographs. I saw none. Removed documents. I have counted every page, and nothing is missing. That should have settled the matter. Instead, it made me uncomfortable. Criminals generally steal things. This fellow seemed content merely to look. I asked another question. "Did you leave him alone?" Ellis hesitated. "For a few minutes." "How many?" "5. "Why?" "A telephone call." "There was no secretary?" She had already left. "So our counterfeit Harper spent 5 minutes alone in this office?" "Yes." "And afterward?" He thanked me and departed. "Anything unusual?" Ellis frowned thoughtfully. He closed one drawer. "Which drawer?" "This one." He pointed toward a large oak desk. I distinctly remember leaving it open. "What was inside?" "Old correspondence. May I?" He nodded. The drawer contained bundles of letters secured by faded ribbon, appointment books, cancelled checks and legal memoranda stretching back many years. Nothing appeared disturbed. Nothing appeared valuable. Nothing appeared worth impersonating another man to examine, which meant naturally that something probably was. I spent nearly an hour going through the property file, warehouse deeds, tax records, boundary surveys, insurance certificates. Everything was orderly. Everything appeared complete. Ellis watched patiently. "Mr. Goodwin, am I overlooking something?" "I don't know yet." He adjusted his spectacles. "I confess I cannot imagine why anyone would impersonate Edwin Harper merely to examine these documents." "I can't either." That annoyed me. I dislike agreeing with attorneys before lunch. Finally, I gathered my notes. "If you discover anything at all, no matter how trivial, telephone Nero Wolfe." "I certainly shall." As I reached the door, Ellis spoke again. "There is one detail." I turned. He never asked to see the property file first. No? He asked specifically for Cabinet C. Cabinet C? Yes. Before you opened it? Precisely. That interested me. "How many cabinets do you have?" 8. So he already knew where the papers were kept. Ellis nodded slowly. I did not realize that until this moment. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had completed lunch and was studying a volume on American shipping companies. I handed him my notebook. He read every page without interruption. When he finished, he closed the cover gently. "You searched the property file?" "Yes, and found nothing." "Correct." "You searched the desk drawer?" "Also nothing." "You asked the wrong question." I stared at him. "I usually save that for Inspector Kramer." The visitor entered the office under an assumed identity. Yes, sir." He possessed prior knowledge of the filing system. Apparently. He remained alone for 5 minutes. "Right. And he removed nothing?" "Exactly." Wolfe leaned back. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean you continue assuming theft. It seems reasonable." "It is pedestrian." I sighed. "Enlighten me." The important act was not taking. What then? Looking. I frowned. He risked months of preparation just to examine papers. One paper? Among hundreds? Quite. I considered it. He already knew Cabinet C. Yes. So he wasn't searching. No. He came directly to something. Exactly. I walked across the room. But why leave it behind? Wolfe picked up Ellis's inventory list, because removing it would announce its importance. The idea settled slowly. If a single document disappeared from an attorney's carefully indexed files, questions would begin immediately. If nothing disappeared, no one would suspect that the visitor had found precisely what he wanted. He memorized it? Perhaps. Copied it? Possibly. Photographed it? Likely. I looked again at my notes. The property file itself may have been a distraction. Indeed. He asked for Cabinet C because he already knew where to look. Wolfe nodded. Archie, an accomplished investigator, pays close attention to what has vanished. I know. A superior criminal understands that. So he leaves everything in place. Precisely. The telephone rang. I answered. Martin Ellis sounded troubled. Mr. Goodwin, yes? I have remembered another detail. I'm listening. The visitor never examined the property agreements first. What did he examine? My appointment ledger. I straightened. Appointment ledger? Yes. He opened it before touching any legal papers. For how long? Less than a minute. What year? 19 years ago. I glanced toward Wolfe. He was watching me closely. After I repeated the information, Wolfe's eyes closed. Ask Mr. Ellis one question. I did. Was there anything inside the appointment book? Ellis answered immediately. There was an old folded memorandum used as a bookmark. Is it still there? A silence followed. Then came the answer. No. I thanked him and replaced the receiver. The room remained quiet. Finally I said, He did take something. Wolfe shook his head. No. The memorandum is gone. It was never the object. What then? He wished Mr. Ellis to notice the missing memorandum. I blinked. You think that was deliberate? I'm certain of it. Why? Because the memorandum served only one purpose. What purpose? To prevent anyone from asking what the visitor actually examined. I stared at the legal inventory spread across my desk. The forged identity had opened a locked office without resistance. The respected name had gained immediate trust. The missing memorandum would now occupy everyone's attention. Meanwhile, somewhere among hundreds of perfectly ordinary legal papers, one forgotten document had been quietly examined, carefully remembered, and left exactly where it belonged. Whoever had borrowed Edwin Harper's name had not entered Martin Ellis's office to steal. He had entered to learn something, and Nero Wolfe was beginning to suspect that whatever the man had learned 19 years in the past was worth far more than anything he could have carried away in his pocket. Chapter 4. The Forgotten Property. When I entered the office the following morning, Nero Wolfe was already behind his desk, with a cup of coffee before him and a newspaper folded into an exact rectangle. Wolfe considered newspapers useful only after someone else had wasted time separating truth from enthusiasm. He glanced up as I crossed the room. "You have been out since 8:30, he observed. "Your powers remain astonishing. They require no exercise when you leave mud on the carpet." I looked down. A thin line of grey dust had escaped the soles of my shoes. The warehouse district had contributed another souvenir. "I'll apologize to Fritz later. You will apologize now by reporting." I settled into my chair and opened my notebook. The murder of Martin Blake, the investigator whose death first drew Nero Wolfe into the affair, had steadily become stranger. We had begun with a frightened client, an unidentified visitor who vanished before reaching our brownstone, and a dead man whose pockets contained little except a folded receipt and a worn brass key. Then Inspector Kramer had produced a document recovered from Blake's apartment. It appeared to concern ownership of an abandoned warehouse on the Lower West Side of Manhattan. At first glance, it seemed worthless. By noon, I had learned that nothing described as worthless ever remains unnoticed in New York if 3 businessmen begin fighting over it. "I visited the Municipal Records Office," I said. "The warehouse has changed owners 6 times during the past 40 years. For profit, usually at a loss. Then why continue purchasing it?" That was precisely my question. Wolfe nodded once. "Continue." "The building stands on Mercer Street beside the river freight yards. It hasn't been used for storage in nearly 15 years. The roof leaks. Half the windows are boarded. Taxes exceed its rental value. And yet 4 separate. Investors have attempted to buy it within the last 3 months." Wolfe leaned back. "Names." I handed him my notes. Charles Benton, Samuel Grant, Edward Lawson, and the latest offer came from Helen Drake. He examined the list. "Do these individuals know one another?" "Officially, no." "Unofficially?" "I haven't reached that chapter." He grunted. That was Wolfe's way of admitting moderate satisfaction. Before another question arrived, Fritz entered, carrying a silver tray with coffee and warm rolls. Wolfe accepted breakfast as solemnly as a judge accepts evidence. I waited. Interrupting Wolfe during breakfast was equivalent to kicking a cathedral. When the tray disappeared, he dabbed his lips carefully. "Archie, yes. The ownership document is not important because of what it grants." "No? It is important because of what compelled 4 intelligent investors to pursue an abandoned structure simultaneously. I reached the same conclusion after climbing 3 flights of municipal stairs. You reached fatigue. I also reached lunch. You omitted it." "That too." He closed his eyes. "Go to the warehouse." "I was there yesterday." "You observed." "I did." "Today you will examine. There is a difference. Observation belongs to everyone. Examination belongs to Wolfe." By 1 o'clock I had crossed Manhattan again. Mercer Street possessed the tired appearance common to neighborhoods waiting either for demolition or a miracle. Trucks rumbled toward the river. Rust covered iron fences. The abandoned warehouse stood exactly as described in the records. 4 stories of neglected brick with faded lettering above enormous loading doors. Someone had recently forced one of the side entrances. That interested me immediately. The broken lock was fresh. Inside, daylight filtered through cracked windows high above stacked beams and empty shelving. Dust covered nearly everything except a narrow path leading toward the rear offices. Somebody had been visiting. I followed the disturbed footprints carefully. The rear office contained almost nothing. A broken desk, 2 filing cabinets without drawers, 1 cracked chair. Another recent visitor had overturned loose floorboards. Fresh pry marks showed plainly against old wood. Someone had searched there within days. Unfortunately, he had either found what he wanted or failed completely. There was little left. As I examined the office, footsteps echoed behind me. I turned. The newcomer wore a clean grey business suit entirely unsuited for abandoned warehouses. He smiled pleasantly. I wasn't expecting company. I might say the same. My name is Charles Benton. One name from Wolfe's list. I've heard it. So have I. He looked around the room. Terrible condition. Yet you offered nearly $300,000 for it. His smile remained. Real estate values change. This neighborhood? Eventually. I admire optimism. So do banks. He studied me. You are Archie Goodwin. I've had that complaint before. You work for Nero Wolfe. I usually do. His pleasant expression did not change, but something behind it became cautious. Mr. Wolfe has become interested in this property? Mr. Wolfe becomes interested whenever people begin dying. His eyebrows lifted. Murder has nothing to do with real estate. That's comforting. He glanced toward the disturbed floor. Did you find anything? I was hoping you'd tell me. He laughed softly. I assure you there's nothing here except rotten timber. Then why did somebody pry up the floor? I couldn't possibly guess. He left after another minute, but not before looking twice toward the damaged boards. That was enough for me. An honest investor looks at walls. A searching man watches the floor. I knelt again beside the loose planks. The boards had been lifted recently with a crowbar, but whoever replaced them worked hurriedly. One corner remained uneven. Using my pocket knife, I eased the board upward. Beneath lay only dirt and fragments of old brick. At first, then I noticed a narrow strip of oilcloth caught beneath a joist. I pulled gently. Out came a folded envelope wrapped carefully against moisture. The paper inside was old, very old. It contained not money nor securities, but a survey map dating back more than 30 years. Across the lower corner appeared several handwritten figures, property boundaries, measurements, and one sentence. Original transfer completed under private agreement. Supporting records stored separately. No signature, no address, only that single note. I folded everything carefully into my pocket. The warehouse had never been valuable because of the building. Someone had hidden records there. The building merely protected them. Outside, I nearly collided with another visitor, Helen Drake. She carried no briefcase, only gloves and determination. You found something. Women occasionally ask questions in a tone that makes answers optional. I found dust. You are lying. Often. She looked directly at me. Mr. Goodwin, if Martin Blake came to Nero Wolfe before he died, then you already know more than the police. Suppose I do. The warehouse isn't important. I've begun suspecting that. It's connected with land purchases made years ago. How many years? 25. Who made them? I don't know. You expect me to believe that? I know only that my father warned me never to discuss Mercer Street. Your father owned property there? He managed legal transfers. Now we were moving. When did he tell you this? A week before he died. Natural causes? She hesitated. Everyone believed so. But you don't. No. Before I could ask another question, an automobile stopped beside the curb. Helen looked toward it. Color left her face. We shouldn't be seen talking. Why? Because the man inside works for someone who has been buying every forgotten property connected with those old transactions. She hurried away without another word. The automobile remained where it was. Its driver watched me through the windshield. He never stepped outside. He merely waited until Helen disappeared around the corner. Then he drove away. Back at the brownstone that evening, Wolfe listened without interrupting while I reported everything. When I finished, he extended one broad hand. The map. I gave it to him. He unfolded it with surprising care. For nearly 5 minutes he studied every line. Finally, he placed the paper flat upon his desk. The warehouse, he said quietly, is merely the visible corner of a much larger structure. I had begun to suspect that. The investors are not purchasing brick. Benton manipulated several legitimate investors, including Samuel Grant and Edward Lawson, into competing for the properties without ever revealing the true objective. They're purchasing history. No, he tapped the handwritten sentence. They are searching for something history concealed. I looked again at the faded note. Supporting records stored separately. Wolfe nodded. Precisely. The warehouse never contained the true evidence. No, it merely pointed toward it. Wolfe closed his eyes. Archie, yes? Tomorrow you will discover where those supporting records were intended to be stored. And if someone else reaches them first? His eyes opened. They have already murdered once. He looked at the map again. They will not hesitate to murder again. For the first time since Martin Blake had walked toward our brownstone and vanished before reaching the front door, I felt the entire case shift beneath my feet. The forgotten property itself was worthless. The real value had never been the warehouse. It was whatever vanished records the abandoned building had silently guarded for more than 3 decades. Chapter 5. The map. Hidden in plain sight, if there is one reliable way to persuade Nero Wolfe that a document deserves attention, it is to assure him that 3 competent lawyers have already examined it. The following morning, after breakfast had been served with the ceremony of a royal audience, and Wolfe had devoted his proper hours to the orchids in the plant rooms, I found him exactly where civilization expected him to be, seated behind his desk with the old survey map spread before him. He had already covered half a sheet of yellow paper with notes written in his careful hand. I dropped into the red leather chair opposite him. I've been thinking. I noticed no smoke, Wolfe murmured without lifting his eyes. I'll remember that. How you seldom do. He adjusted his spectacles and continued studying the faded document recovered beneath the warehouse floor. The survey itself appeared ordinary enough. Boundary lines, measurements, drainage marks, and property references filled the page. Every surveyor in New York had probably drawn 1,000 maps that looked exactly like it. Yet Wolfe had spent nearly an hour examining this one. That alone made me suspicious. He finally spoke. Archie, describe the map. I already did. You described paper. I mentioned lines. You observed ink. I even admired the handwriting. He sighed. It is astonishing how frequently intelligent men mistake eyesight for perception. I've heard something like that before. From me. Frequently. He ignored the interruption. Tell me where your attention settled. The property boundaries. Naturally, the measurements. Predictably. The note concerning supporting records. Reasonably. He leaned back. And what did you entirely overlook? I've been waiting for that. Without answering, Wolfe rotated the map toward me. Observed the lower right corner. I bent closer. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed a thin, broken line extending beneath the warehouse itself. Unlike the boundary markings, it carried no explanation. Only a tiny handwritten symbol. What is that? It is not part of the official survey. No municipal engineer would have used that notation. I examined it again. The broken line disappeared beneath the neighboring properties before ending beneath an entire block of commercial buildings. It looks like finish. A passage. Yes, an underground passage. Precisely. I frowned. It isn't labeled, because it was never intended to be. He tapped the edge of the paper. The official survey ends here. His finger stopped before reaching the mysterious line. The additional markings were drawn afterward. By whom? Someone who possessed confidential knowledge unavailable to the public. I looked again. The passage had been blended so carefully among drainage marks that I had accepted it without question. Only after Wolfe isolated it did the difference become obvious. The tunnel runs beneath several adjoining properties. Exactly. And ends. Beneath the Hamilton Commercial Building. That name meant little until I reached for yesterday's notes. Then it struck me. The Hamilton Building sits in the center of nearly every recent property purchase. Indeed, the investors weren't buying abandoned warehouses. They were assembling land above something. The tunnel we had already traced from the warehouse survey. Wolfe nodded once. Excellent. I occasionally deserve encouragement. Do not become accustomed to it. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. A moment later, Fritz admitted, Inspector Kramer. The inspector carried an expression suggesting someone had misplaced his patience before breakfast. "I hope you got something better than theories." Wolfe indicated a chair. "I possess observations. I'll settle for those." Kramer remained standing. "We've identified the dead man who rented the room across from Martin Blake." That surprised me. The stranger. His papers identified him as Daniel Harris. And they belonged to somebody else. I straightened. "What do you mean?" "The real Daniel Harris has been living in Ohio for 15 years. So the dead man borrowed his identity." "Stole it," Kramer corrected. He removed several photographs from his folder. "The fingerprints don't match." Wolfe accepted the photographs calmly. "Excellent." Kramer blinked. "Excellent? It removes an unnecessary complication. I don't enjoy unnecessary complications either." "No," Wolfe agreed. "You merely create them." I expected an explosion. Instead, Kramer ignored the remark. Why would somebody assume another man's identity just to rent a room? Wolfe folded his hands. "Not to rent a room." "No?" "To gain access." Kramer frowned. "Access to what?" "The warehouse. The building has stood empty for years." "Buildings are often empty," Wolfe replied. "Records seldom are." I handed Kramer the survey map. He studied it for nearly a minute. "I don't see anything." Neither did Archie. "That doesn't encourage me." Wolfe extended one finger toward the faint broken line. "There." Kramer leaned closer. His eyebrows rose. "I'll be." "Quite." "The tunnel?" "Yes." "The city never recorded this." "Precisely." The inspector studied the map again. "If this exists." "It does." "Then someone using a false identity could investigate it without attracting attention." "Correct. And nobody would connect the search to the people actually financing it." Wolfe smiled slightly. "Now you perceive the advantage." Kramer looked at me. The fake Harris wasn't hiding from the police. No, he was hiding from whoever employed him. "More likely," Wolfe said, "he was hiding from everyone." The inspector left 20 minutes later, carrying photographs of the survey. He promised nothing except that city engineers would be consulted immediately. After the front door closed, I stretched my legs. So Daniel Harris never existed in this case. The genuine man exists. You know what I mean. I do. The stranger needed respectable identification. "Temporary respectability," Wolfe corrected. "Enough to inspect property records. Enough to request surveys. Enough to enter municipal archives, and enough to disappear before questions became inconvenient." I nodded slowly. Everything fit together a little better. Someone had borrowed another man's name, not to escape recognition, to avoid attracting it. Around noon, Saul Panzer arrived. When Saul entered our office without knocking twice, it generally meant he had found something worth carrying personally. He removed a notebook from his pocket. "I've traced the recent property purchases." "Sit," Wolfe instructed. Saul remained standing. "The investors appear independent." "They are not." "I know." "Continue." "Each purchase passed through the same legal office." I looked up. "Whose?" "William Carter." The name meant nothing to me. Saul anticipated that. Carter specializes in forgotten property claims. Convenient. Very. He represented Benton. Yes. Grant. Yes. Lawson. Yes. Helen Drake. No. That caught Wolfe's attention. "No?" "Miss Drake attempted to purchase directly and failed." "Correct. Why?" "The owner refused." "Interesting." Saul opened another page. "Yesterday evening, someone entered Carter's office after closing." "Burglary?" "No." "Nothing stolen?" "Apparently not." "What happened?" The visitor searched only one cabinet. "What did it contain?" "Old survey records." I whistled softly. "They're looking for another map." Saul nodded. That was my conclusion. When he departed, silence settled over the office. Wolfe closed his eyes. Whenever Wolfe became quiet after receiving fresh information, I knew the machinery behind his forehead had begun fitting pieces together faster than mine ever would. Finally, he spoke. "The warehouse contract." "Yes. It concealed the survey." The survey concealed the tunnel. Correct. And the false identity concealed the search. Precisely. I leaned forward. So the stranger borrowed Daniel Harris's name because nobody questions a licensed property investigator requesting forgotten surveys. Wolfe's eyes opened. There is the heart of the matter. He never intended to own the warehouse. No, he intended to reach confidential records, without revealing who truly wanted them. Wolfe nodded. The identity itself was merely another key. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else said that afternoon. The brass key found in Martin Blake's pocket, the warehouse key, the survey map, the borrowed identity. Every one of them unlocked something. None of them possessed value alone. Late that evening, I spread copies of the property records across my own desk, while Wolfe reread the survey for perhaps the 20th time. The faint tunnel no longer seemed hidden. It seemed obvious, which was precisely why almost everyone had overlooked it. The greatest concealments are rarely achieved by locking information away. They are accomplished by placing it in plain sight, where every eye sees it, and no mind recognizes its importance. As I gathered the papers into neat piles, Wolfe spoke without looking up. Archie, yes? The tunnel leads somewhere. I gathered that. The destination is important. The warehouse isn't. No. The map isn't. No. The borrowed identity isn't. No. They are merely steps. He folded the survey carefully and placed it back inside its protective envelope. The destination, he said quietly, is where someone believed a secret valuable enough to justify murder has remained hidden for many years. Outside, the evening traffic rolled steadily along West 35th Street, unaware that beneath one forgotten warehouse lay the first visible trace of a path someone had already killed to protect. Chapter 6. The Witness Who Vanished There. Are mornings when New York appears determined to convince a man that nothing extraordinary can happen before noon. Delivery wagons crowded the curb outside the brownstone, a street sweeper complained about parked automobiles, and Fritz served breakfast with the calm assurance that kidneys, bacon, and coffee remained more important than homicide. By 10 o'clock, that illusion had dissolved. The telephone rang, I answered. Inspector Kramer's voice reached me without the usual greeting. Archie? Unfortunately. Get down to the Wellington Hotel. Why? The desk clerk you interviewed yesterday. What about him? He's dead. That ended the conversation. I climbed the stairs to the plant rooms because Wolfe was in the middle of his morning appointment with the orchids, and interrupting him required a reason stronger than curiosity. He looked down from a bench where he was examining a pale yellow cattleya. Well? The hotel clerk. What of him? Somebody murdered him. Wolfe did not immediately reply. He continued adjusting the orchid with remarkable gentleness before setting the pot aside. When? Early this morning. How? Kramer neglected the poetry. He removed his gardening gloves with slow precision. Very well, we shall hear the prose. Half an hour later, I was standing once again inside the Wellington Hotel. The lobby looked exactly as respectable as it had the previous afternoon. Only the policeman ruined the atmosphere. Kramer met me beside the front desk. The body was discovered in the records office. The clerk? He nodded. Arthur Collins. Cause? One blow. Professional? So says the medical examiner. I looked toward the hallway leading to the small office, where Collins had cheerfully answered my questions less than 24 hours earlier. He was alive when I left. He talked too much. Apparently. Kramer watched me. What did he tell you? He remembered the man who registered under the name Daniel Harris. The false identity. Right. He mentioned anything unusual? Not yesterday. Kramer grunted. I was hoping. So was I. We entered the records room. Collins lay beside an overturned chair. His spectacles rested several feet away. The filing cabinet nearest the door stood open. Drawers had been searched hurriedly. The papers, scattered across the floor, reminded me of the warehouse office. Someone had been looking for records again, only this time a witness had been removed as well. A police photographer was finishing his work. I wandered toward the cabinet. Kramer. What? These files. Yes? They're hotel registration copies. We know. Whoever searched here wasn't after money. No, he wanted one particular guest. Looks that way. The inspector reached into the cabinet and withdrew a thick ledger, every registration card for the last 6 months. Anything missing? 1 page. I accepted the ledger. Sure enough, a single registration card had been cut cleanly from the binding, not torn, removed carefully, the false Harris. So we think. I turned another page, then another. Something bothered me. Hotels preserve records because nobody imagines they will matter. Unless somebody later decides they matter very much. A young woman approached from a side office. I believe you're Mr. Goodwin. I've occasionally admitted it. My name is Emily Foster. She held a small envelope. I supervise the hotel office. Kramer looked at her. You've remembered something? I wasn't certain until this morning. She handed me the envelope. We photograph the registration desk every afternoon. I blinked. You what? For insurance. She seemed embarrassed. The manager believes photographs discourage disputes about missing luggage. I opened the envelope. Inside were several glossy photographs showing the front desk from different angles. The first 2 revealed nothing useful. Guests arriving, porters carrying trunks, businessmen signing forms. The third photograph stopped me. A man stood at the counter. His face was partly turned away. The desk clerk handed him the register. The man had removed a ring from his right hand. It rested beside the open ledger. His pen remained suspended above the signature line. He hadn't signed yet, I murmured. Emily nodded. The photograph was taken at that exact moment. Kramer leaned over my shoulder. So he removed the ring before writing. Why would anybody do that? I looked closer. The man's face remained partly hidden by the angle. The ring, however, appeared perfectly clear, large, heavy, square, dark stone, distinctive enough to notice. He took it off intentionally. Kramer frowned. People remove rings. Not before signing hotel registers. Emily hesitated. I remember thinking it seemed odd. You noticed? Only because he looked at the ring for a second before putting it into his pocket. Kramer scratched his chin, then signed Daniel Harris. Exactly, I tucked the photograph into my notebook. May I borrow this? You'll return it? I promise. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had already finished lunch and was demonstrating that digestion deserved complete silence. I waited. Patience around Nero Wolfe eventually becomes instinct. When coffee appeared, I placed the photograph before him. He studied it without speaking. 5 minutes passed, then another. Finally, he lifted his eyes. Excellent, I smiled. I've started collecting compliments. Do not become greedy. He looked again at the photograph. The ring. Yes, you perceive only that it is unusual. I also perceive that he removed it. But not why. I was hoping you'd explain. Wolfe folded his hands. Consider the sequence. He enters. Yes, he receives the register. Yes, he removes the ring. Correct. He signs another man's name. Precisely. I frowned. He didn't remove it because writing felt uncomfortable. No. He removed it because. The answer hovered just beyond reach. Wolfe supplied it. The ring identified him. I stared. Of course, the borrowed identity required consistency. He couldn't risk anyone remembering the ring or describing it later. I picked up the photograph again, so whoever knew him might recognize that ring immediately. Exactly. And he remembered to hide it before signing. Indeed. I paced once across the office. The false name concealed his face. No. It concealed his purpose. Yes. The ring concealed his true identity. Better. I stopped. If we identify the ring, we identify the man. The doorbell rang. Moments later, Saul Panzer entered. He carried the expression that usually meant he had uncovered something expensive. I've shown the photograph around. So quickly, I asked. I began before you arrived. Saul laid 3 index cards on Wolfe's desk. Nobody recognized the face. The ring? Different matter. He tapped the first card. 3 jewelers remembered a custom signet ring with a black onyx stone. The second card. Commissioned 12 years ago. The third. The customer requested one unusual feature. What? Saul looked at Wolfe. The family crest inside the band instead of outside. I whistled softly, so nobody could identify it while it was being worn. Exactly. Wolfe nodded with satisfaction. "Herr cautious man," Saul continued. "The jeweler kept his measurements. And the ring was made for Charles Benton." Silence settled over the room. The investor, the man I had met inside the warehouse, the man who smiled too easily. I said slowly, "If Benton owned that ring, he might have lent it. Possible he might have sold it. Possible. He might have been the man using Daniel Harris's identity." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Possible," I laughed. "That's a generous word. It is also accurate." Wolfe rose from his chair and crossed to the window overlooking West 35th Street. For several moments he watched the afternoon traffic. When he finally spoke, his voice had become unusually quiet. The hotel clerk died because memory became dangerous. He remembered the imposter, not consciously. "What do you mean?" He retained fragments. The ring, the hesitation, the false signature. He knew more than he realized. Precisely. I looked once more at the photograph. The imposter's face remained hidden. His borrowed name was false. His trail had been carefully erased. Yet in the simple habit of removing a ring before signing another man's name, he had committed the first genuine mistake since the case began. A man may borrow a name. He may borrow papers. He may even borrow another life for a few days. But habits acquired over years are far more difficult to disguise. Somewhere in New York, the owner of that distinctive signet ring had begun to understand that the smallest forgotten gesture could prove far deadlier than any witness left alive to describe it. Chapter 7. The name that opened. Every door by the time breakfast ended the following morning, I had acquired a renewed respect for coffee. Not because Fritz had prepared it perfectly, though he had, but because I suspected I would need every drop before the day was over. The photograph from the Wellington Hotel lay on Wolfe's desk beside the survey map and Martin Blake's notebook. 3 unrelated objects, according to anyone who enjoyed living with comfortable illusions. Wolfe disliked comfortable illusions. He sat with his fingertips together, his eyes closed, and the expression of a man listening to an argument that everyone else had failed to hear. I watched him for nearly 5 minutes. Finally I said, "If you're asleep, I'll answer the telephone. I am thinking." I've occasionally mistaken one for the other. I know. Without opening his eyes, he added, "Archie, Saul Panzer will arrive within 10 minutes. He tell you that? No. Then how do you know? He is punctual." 9 minutes later, the bell rang. I admitted Saul, who entered carrying a slim leather portfolio, and the satisfied expression that usually meant someone else's secret had become his property. I found the ring. Wolfe opened his eyes. I anticipated as much. Saul laid a photograph on the desk. This came from the files of the jeweler who made it. The picture showed a heavy gold signet ring with a square black stone. The inside of the band bore a deeply engraved family crest exactly as Saul had described. Beneath the photograph appeared a customer's name. Thomas Caldwell. I looked at Saul. Not Charles Benton. He paid one repair bill years later. The original owner? Thomas Caldwell. The name stirred something faintly familiar. I searched my memory. Property consultant? Saul nodded. One of the most successful in New York 15 years ago. And then he disappeared. I leaned back. I remember the newspapers. So do I, Saul said. Financial irregularities, missing investment funds, civil lawsuits, no criminal conviction because Caldwell vanished before charges were completed. Wife? Dead. Children? None. Found? Never. Saul removed another sheet. I also visited the Municipal Licensing Bureau. Wolfe accepted the document. Caldwell possessed unrestricted authorization to examine commercial property records for nearly 20 years. I frowned. That would explain his knowledge of forgotten buildings. No, Wolfe replied quietly. It explains something more important. Saul looked toward him. What? Caldwell understood where valuable records were kept. I reached for the hotel photograph. So Thomas Caldwell was our imposter. Wolfe shook his head. No, I blinked. The ring belonged to him. Yes. The hotel guest wore it. Yes. So, you proceed too rapidly. I sighed. Again. Frequently. Wolfe rose and walked to the large map of Manhattan hanging beside the bookcases. He marked 3 locations with drawing pins: the Wellington Hotel, the abandoned warehouse, Martin Ellis's office. Then he returned to his desk. "Observe?" I did. "I see 3 places. You see geography." I was afraid of that. Caldwell visited none of them by accident. Saul frowned. "Martin Ellis?" The attorney. "Yes." "What about him?" Wolfe opened Martin Blake's notebook. Several appointments filled the pages. One name appeared repeatedly: Edwin Harper. I stared. "We've been looking at Harper's name since the first chapter of this affair." "Indeed," and ignoring it entirely, I turned another page. Every confidential appointment concerning the Mercer Street properties had been entered under the same visitor, Edwin Harper, again, and again, and again. I looked up. The hotel register. Precisely. Our dead visitor never signed Daniel Harris. No, he signed Edwin Harper. Correct, I frowned. Kramer said the identification belonged to Daniel Harris. The wallet. Oh, the hotel register contained another name. I laughed, despite myself. "We've been chasing the wrong ghost." "Exactly," Saul said quietly. "The real Edwin Harper exists." Wolfe nodded. "Very much so." "He still works?" "Yes." "As what?" "Senior property consultant for Ellis Commercial Holdings." The room became very still. I stood. "Good heavens," Wolfe inclined his head. "There is the answer. Only Edwin Harper could walk into Martin Ellis's office without attracting attention." "Exactly. The clerks knew him. The receptionists expected him. The confidential files would be opened automatically. No questions, no suspicion." I paced once around the office, so Caldwell didn't borrow Harper's identity to hide. No. He borrowed it because Harper possessed unrestricted access. "Excellent." Saul added another piece. "I spoke with Ellis's office manager." "What did she say?" I asked. "Harper visited every Thursday for years. Regular as clockwork." "Exactly." "No one checked identification?" "Never. They simply recognized him." Saul nodded. "Until one Thursday when someone arrived wearing Harper's hat, Harper's overcoat, and carrying Harper's briefcase. I stopped walking," the receptionist admitted him, "without hesitation, because she believed she already knew him." "Precisely." Wolfe looked almost content. "Identity is frequently a matter of expectation." I grinned. "You've said stranger things." "But seldom truer," Saul continued. "The genuine Edwin Harper was attending a surveying conference in Albany that same afternoon. So Caldwell selected the only day Harper couldn't appear unexpectedly." "Correct. And nobody discovered the substitution until Martin Blake was murdered." I looked again at the hotel photograph. The imposter had removed Caldwell's distinctive ring. Borrowed another man's name, borrowed another man's appearance, borrowed another man's professional routine. Every step had been calculated. Only one small habit had betrayed him. The ring. I asked Wolfe, "What did Caldwell remove from Ellis's office?" He answered without hesitation. "The confidential survey archive. The tunnel maps. More than that. The supporting property records." "Precisely. The documents hidden separately." He nodded. "The warehouse pointed toward them. The survey identified their existence, and Ellis's office preserved the originals." Everything that had puzzled us since Martin Blake's murder suddenly aligned. The abandoned warehouse had never contained the secret. It contained only the direction. The confidential office contained the truth. I sat again. Martin Blake discovered Caldwell's deception. Apparently, so Caldwell silenced him. Likely. And then the hotel clerk remembered too much, hence the second murder. Saul reached into his portfolio one final time. I nearly forgot. He produced an old newspaper clipping. A photograph accompanied the article. Thomas Caldwell stood beside a younger Martin Ellis during the dedication of a commercial redevelopment project nearly 16 years earlier. I examined it carefully. The two men were smiling. Friends, partners, perhaps more. Wolfe noticed my expression. Yes, Caldwell already knew Ellis, intimately, so he understood exactly how the office functioned, and precisely which identity would open every door. Wolfe folded the clipping and placed it beside the survey map. The scheme required remarkable preparation. Years, perhaps, but it depended upon one assumption, which was that no one would ever question a familiar face carrying a familiar name. Outside the office window, traffic rolled steadily along West 35th Street while the afternoon sunlight settled across Wolfe's desk. 3 clues rested together: a forgotten warehouse, a concealed survey map, a hotel photograph showing a man removing a ring before signing another man's name. Individually, they meant almost nothing. Together, they revealed that Thomas Caldwell had not stolen Edwin Harper's identity merely to conceal himself from the world. He had borrowed it because Edwin Harper's respected name opened doors that remained firmly locked to everyone else, including the one office where the confidential records connecting Martin Ellis to decades of concealed property transactions had been quietly waiting for the right imposter to claim them. Chapter 8. Wolfe opens the only locked door by. 6 o'clock that evening, the brownstone on West 35th Street had acquired the atmosphere Wolfe preferred when a case approached its conclusion. Fritz moved quietly between the dining room and the office, setting out coffee with the precision of a master craftsman. The red leather chairs had been arranged in a broad semicircle facing Wolfe's desk, and the yellow shades cast a warm light over shelves crowded with books that had witnessed more than one criminal's downfall. I stood by the window, watching Manhattan hurry through another evening, without realizing that half a dozen lives were about to change inside one old brownstone. Inspector Kramer arrived first. He surveyed the assembled chairs with open suspicion. "I don't like this." "You rarely do," I told him. "It usually means Wolfe already knows something he neglected to tell me." "That has happened. Frequently. I was trying to spare your feelings." "How you were trying to spare Wolfe?" "That too." One by one the others appeared. Charles Benton entered with his customary polished confidence, though it had lost a little of its shine since our conversation at the warehouse. Helen Drake came next, calm but alert, carrying the quiet determination that had impressed me from the beginning. Martin Ellis arrived precisely on time, accompanied by his office manager, Ruth Mercer, whose memory had proved unexpectedly valuable. Saul Panzer slipped into a chair near the bookcases without attracting attention, which was one of Saul's professional accomplishments. The last guest surprised everyone, Edwin Harper himself. He was a lean man in his early 60s, neatly dressed with silver hair and the composed manner of someone who had spent 30 years handling valuable commercial property without ever becoming excited by it. He looked around the room. "I understand someone has been using my name." Wolfe inclined his head. "Unfortunately." Harper settled into a chair. "I should like to know why." "You shall." When Fritz had served coffee and withdrawn, Wolfe folded his hands upon the desk. No one spoke. Even Kramer remained silent. Wolfe allowed the quiet to settle over the room before beginning. "Gentlemen and ladies, this investigation has been burdened by an unfortunate assumption." He looked slowly from face to face. Everyone believed the central mystery concerned a stolen identity. Charles Benton shifted slightly, Wolfe noticed. It did not. Martin Ellis frowned. "Then what was the mystery?" "It concerned a locked door." Kramer snorted. "There wasn't any locked door. There was exactly one. I didn't find it." "No," Wolfe replied, "because it required no key made by a locksmith." I smiled. "Here we go." Wolfe continued. "Mr. Goodwin discovered an abandoned warehouse. Beneath its floor lay an old survey map. Hidden upon that map was an underground passage leading beneath valuable commercial property." Helen Drake nodded. "The tunnel we had already traced from the warehouse survey." "Yes." "But the tunnel itself possessed little value." Ellis leaned forward. "It led to confidential records." "Precisely." Wolfe lifted the folded survey. "The warehouse merely pointed toward information preserved elsewhere." He placed the map beside Martin Blake's notebook. Those original records remained inside Mr. Ellis's confidential archive. Ellis looked startled. "My office?" "Indeed. The archive is locked, naturally. It requires special authorization." "Exactly." Wolfe's eyes rested upon Edwin Harper, and there existed only one consultant who entered that office so frequently that no employee questioned his presence. Harper nodded slowly. "Myself." "Correct." Wolfe looked toward the others. The murderer understood a simple truth. He paused. Breaking into the archive would attract immediate attention. Kramer grunted. It certainly would. Walking through the front entrance as Edwin Harper would not. Silence followed. I could almost hear several minds changing direction at once. Harper spoke quietly. So someone borrowed my identity? Yes. But not to conceal himself. No. Wolfe shook his head. He borrowed your reputation. That sentence struck the room harder than any accusation. Ruth Mercer whispered, "We never asked for identification. Caillou had no reason. We knew Mr. Harper. So you believed." Wolfe lifted the hotel photograph. The impostor removed his signet ring before signing Mr. Harper's name. Charles Benton glanced toward the photograph, only for an instant. It was enough. Wolfe saw it. So did I. "The ring," Wolfe continued, "belonged to Thomas Caldwell." Martin Ellis stiffened. "Caldwell. You recognize the name. I worked with him years ago. You trusted him. At one time. He disappeared after substantial financial scandals." Ellis nodded reluctantly, so everyone believed. Wolfe allowed the words to settle. Thomas Caldwell did disappear. His eyes shifted toward Charles Benton, but only his name disappeared. Kramer turned sharply. "What?" "The man himself remained in New York." Benton laughed softly. "That is absurd." "Is it? You cannot possibly prove such nonsense." Wolfe reached toward the stack of papers before him. "Mr. Goodwin interviewed you inside the abandoned warehouse." "Yes." "You displayed unusual interest in disturbed floorboards." "I was curious." "You also paid to repair Thomas Caldwell's signet ring 11 years ago." Benton's smile weakened. "I purchased antique jewelry." "No." Wolfe produced the jeweler's invoice. "You instructed the jeweler never to alter the family crest concealed inside the band." Benton said nothing. Saul finally spoke. "I interviewed the craftsman." The room remained very still. He remembered the customer. Kramer looked from Saul to Benton. "You?" Benton shrugged. "A coincidence." "No," Wolfe replied. The jeweler also remembered one other detail. He lifted another document. The customer requested that all future repairs be entered under the name Charles Benton. Martin Ellis slowly turned toward Benton. "You." Benton's pleasant expression hardened. "I changed my name legally years ago." "There was a reason." "I preferred privacy." "You preferred distance." Wolfe's voice remained calm. "Distance from Thomas Caldwell." No one interrupted him. The financial scandals destroyed Caldwell's reputation. He glanced toward Edwin Harper. "But a ruined reputation opens no confidential offices." Harper nodded grimly. "My name did." "Exactly." Wolfe leaned back. "So Caldwell became Charles Benton. He remained respectable. He invested quietly. He waited. And eventually discovered the forgotten survey beneath the warehouse." Helen Drake spoke for the first time. "He needed the original archive." "Yes." "He could not obtain it openly." "No." "So he borrowed Edwin Harper's identity." "Correct." Martin Ellis looked almost ill. My receptionist admitted him. Without hesitation. "Because she believed. She believed a trusted consultant had arrived for another routine appointment." Wolfe nodded. "The only locked door in this entire case stood inside your office." He looked around the room. It was never forced. It was politely opened. Kramer stood. "What about Blake?" Wolfe answered immediately. Martin Blake recognized Caldwell after the visit. He remembered him from the old property investigations. Caldwell arranged a meeting and murdered him. The hotel clerk. He noticed the unusual habit of removing the ring before signing Harper's name. He remembered too much. So Caldwell silenced him as, "Well," Charles Benton rose slowly, "you've built an entertaining story. I have built a logical sequence. You have no proof I killed anyone." Wolfe regarded him almost lazily. "You fled. I traveled. You concealed your former identity. I changed my name legally. You continued paying insurance upon property originally acquired by Thomas Caldwell." Benton's eyes narrowed. "You searched the warehouse after Blake's death. You visited the hotel under another name. You repaired the same distinctive ring. You alone possessed knowledge of the tunnel, the confidential archive, and Edwin Harper's routine." Wolfe's voice remained quiet. Every important fact in this investigation leads to one individual. The remaining investors merely pursued profitable real estate opportunities, unaware that Charles Benton was using their competition to conceal his own search for the confidential records. Inspector, Kramer moved beside Benton. You'd better stay where you are. For the first time since I had met him, Benton looked uncertain, only for a moment. Then his shoulders sagged. I never intended to kill Blake. No murderer ever does, Wolfe said. The room fell silent. Outside, traffic drifted along West 35th Street, and somewhere upstairs, Wolfe's orchids waited for the evening misting. Kramer signaled two detectives waiting beyond the hallway. They entered and placed Benton under arrest without resistance. As the front door closed behind them, Edwin Harper looked across the office toward Wolfe. All because someone borrowed my name. Wolfe shook his head. No, Mr. Harper. He rested one hand upon the folded survey map. Not because he borrowed it, because everyone trusted it. He looked toward me. Archie. People frequently imagine that the strongest key is made of steel or brass. I smiled. And they're wrong. Entirely. He glanced once more at the empty chair Charles Benton had occupied. The strongest key in New York was never made of metal. His eyes settled on Edwin Harper. It was a trusted man's good name. The mystery that had begun with a frightened visitor, a forgotten warehouse, a concealed survey, and a borrowed identity had never truly concerned any of those things. Each had been only another step toward a single locked door, and the only key that ever opened it without suspicion was the reputation of an honest man who never knew it had been stolen.